Thank you and good morning. Please make sure your phones are turned off. Please check to make sure your phones are turned off. You don't want to be that one person. One time I was doing the Dhamma talk and somebody's phone went off. And it rang and rang and rang, and then finally stopped. And I carried on, and it rang and rang again. Finally stopped, and 2 minutes later it started ringing again. And I said, "Come on, whoever's phone that is, can you just turn it off?" And the noise was coming from behind the wall, and this guy picked up the bag with the offending phone in it. It's my bag. So don't be that. My phone. Okay, so this morning this will be my last talk here in Singapore. I've heard my biography read so many times now. They say, and he's currently finishing a master's degree in Buddhist studies. I could have finished it the amount of times I've heard that said. So, the topic this evening is Samson, because when the office asked me for the titles for talks, unless you suggest something, which I'm very happy to, then I will just pick out the topics that I really like. And this particular topic is the story of Samson and Delilah, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, and is one of my favorite stories because it is full of wisdom, it's full of Dharma, so make no mistake, people think of this as a Christian story. It's not. It goes back long, long before Christianity, and even long before the Buddha too. This is a very old story about desire. So I want to start at what I call the scope of vision. And what I mean by this is your imagination and how far your imagination is able and willing to kind of pick up and understand the world around you. So when I was very young, we moved house when I was around 6 years old, and went to the new house, and it had a big garden, and it had a very thick hedge all the way around most of the garden. And at the very end of the garden was a stream. And I was told, you don't go beyond the hedge, because I was 6 years old and it's a new house. And I hadn't learned to recite my name and address. I could recite my old name, my old address, but I couldn't recite the new address. But there was a loophole in that at the end of the garden was this stream, and it wasn't actually bounded by a hedge. So I figured I could push that boundary further and further. And in fact, this stream went probably about 3 miles, and then finally joined up a bigger river further down. So when I was 6, my scope started to extend to this limit. I was at the primary school, and I remember telling my parents that when I finish primary school, I don't want to go to big school, we called it, grammar school, because that was beyond my scope. And, of course, my opinion didn't carry very much weight with my parents. And they said, "What are you going to do, get a job?" And I was like, well, I'm 9 years old, so unless you're going to send me up the chimneys, then... So I went to the grammar school and I extended my scope again. And then what I found is, like, stage by stage through life, like, the scope has expanded. I know many people that live where I live that still live there. They've never really been out of South Manchester area. So each time that I've kind of moved on, my scope, my understanding of the world has expanded. And then you get to leave school and you get a job and then you get a bigger job. And by the time you get to around 40, I think, your scope hits the limits, right? In fact, your scope starts to kind of shrink after that. And you get less and less. You know, I saw this cartoon once about, there was a graph. And on the graph was a curve. And at the bottom of the curve it says, I know everything and I can change the world. And this is up to around the age of 16. And then as you get up to the age of 40, the curve moves. And it comes down to, the world's too confusing and I can't change anything. And then as you get to the retirement age of around 70, you go back to, I know everything and I could change the world if everyone would listen to me. So I think the scope kind of contracts a bit as you get older. But what interested me about this is that all the things that you learn of the regular life and of your change and getting a career and a job and married and family and all the rest of it. But there's another scope that lies beyond that. And this is the scope when you realize you're going to die. And when you really understand, when it hits home that you have this future of death, then your scope necessarily has to change. Because things that mattered before in this context no longer matter. And if anybody has faced death, it's very common in Bangkok, because every time you get in a Bangkok taxi, you're facing death right in the... So your context changes, right? You're less willing to hold on to grudges, and you find things that you thought were important are much less important, and other things that you didn't think were important now are important. The scope changes, and you realize that really the only truly important story is this story of the fact that we are living and dying, and that this is what our next stage is going to be. We're going to have to tackle this question. So there are plenty of people who have tackled this question. According to Buddha, according to our teaching, the nature of the mind is of enlightenment. That means it is your kind of birthright, it's your nature. But what happens is we get caught up in experiencing. So all the attention flows out of the citta, out of the mind, out of the heart, and gets caught up and attached with the things that we can experience. And this process of being caught up in experiencing is called dependent origination. It's one of the key Buddhist teachings. But effectively it just means that when you put your attention onto something, once your attention is on it, you're going to get a cascade of reactions, stimulus and response. So you put your attention onto your child, you think about your child, and you get this cascade of feeling, either liking or not liking, or wishing they would do better at school, or thinking they have the wrong boyfriend or girlfriend and you don't approve. Whatever it is, if we call it into your mind, you're going to get this cascade of feelings, thoughts and associations. If you put your mind onto something else, onto North Korea, you get a cascade of feelings, thoughts and emotions that come from that. So for human beings, our entire existence is this pattern of putting our attention onto things and being caught up in this cascade of thoughts, feelings and associations that comes from that. And about the only time that you stop doing that is when you go to sleep. And probably for most people, actually this continues while you're sleeping too. So this is because of this nature of us always focusing outwards onto experience. What's happening is you're losing sight of the actual nature of what you are. In Mahayana Buddhism, they call this Buddha nature. The idea of Buddha nature also exists in Theravada, but it isn't named Buddha nature, but it does exist there. The unconditioned, the deathless, various different terms. Now, if this is true, one would expect many different people around the world to have discovered it, right? If this is the actual nature, and all that we really need to do to get back to it is to stop. We just need to stop being drawn out into our experiencing persona, and then the attention will return to it. So it would make sense that many people around the world have attained to this, have found this and seen it, and have recorded it and taught it to others. And this we find to be the case. Throughout every culture, every civilization, we have records of saints and sages who have retreated from regular life, gone to the roots of the trees, the caves, the mountains, in order to turn the attention back inwards. And these people have had a varying degree of success. Some have become really probably enlightened, but who knows? Others less so. But this drive has been a calling of human nature always. I did read this story of a monk in Romania, and he was a real recluse, a real mystic, and he turned his attention inwards, and he lived in a cave in order to be withdrawn from society. And then one day his cave got robbed. So he went to the police station and he had to make a report of all the things that were stolen. And you know what was stolen? His laptop, his monitor, his printer, his Wi-Fi, everything had gone. So, varying degrees of success that people have had in this endeavor to find our real nature. Now let us suppose that some people do attain to this ultimate. They do crack this secret of life and death. Then what do they teach to other people? Well, they can teach somebody, you can say things to people, but usually the person that's listening is not going to attain to the same degree that that teacher attained to. And my favorite story for this actually comes from the Bible, because I think this is quite funny. I don't know many Bible stories, I've barely read it, but certain of the stories stick in your mind, being brought up in a Christian environment. And it was a story of Jesus in a boat, and he gets out of the boat and he's walking on water. And I think it was Paul was in the boat with him and said, "Oh, wow, that's amazing, that's a good trick." And Jesus says to him, "You can do it too." He said, "Really? Yes, just get out of the boat and walk on water." So he gets out of the boat and he starts walking on water. He's like, "Wow, I can do it." But after a few steps, he starts to sink. And Jesus says to him, "You have very little faith." I thought that was a bit tight because, he'd just been walking on water for a few steps. That's a lot of faith there, I think. But what this story encapsulates is that what happens is you have the teacher, and the teacher tries to impart the knowledge, but you don't get the full knowledge from that teacher. So the teaching goes into a decline automatically. And we see this in Buddhism also. People said to me, "Oh, if only I could be with Ajahn Chah, then I would have been enlightened, Or Ajahn Chah met Ajahn Man. You're like, "Oh, well, if I could have met Ajahn Man, then it would have been really good." Or if only I could have met the Buddha, then I would be enlightened for sure. But why? You still have the same teaching that the Buddha gave, right? On the Four Noble Truths and other teachings. You can still hear his words. Why would you need to be in front of him? An inspiration maybe, but inspiration is very hit and miss, right? The charisma of the person. Do you know that story of Upagupta, the Arahant, some few hundred years after the Buddha, and he was the greatest remaining Arahant, and he captured Mara, the god of delusion, and he tied him to a rock. And he said, I will let you go on one condition. He said, I've never seen the Buddha, and Mara was the only being left who had actually seen the living form of the Buddha. And so he said to Mara, I want you to show me what the Buddha looked like. So Mara took on the form of the Buddha, and immediately Upagupta fell to his knees and started bowing. So this idea of if you can find the right guru, well, we have the teachings, but do you need that inspiration? This changing form and things into the Buddha, you might doubt whether it's true, but there is a story of Prasankachai. I'm not sure if this is just a Thai story or where it came from. But in this story, there was Prasankachai, and he was very beautiful, and people would mistake him for the Buddha. And so people, especially women, would kind of follow him around and chase him and try to tempt him because he was just so utterly beautiful and serene. And he found this to be a real burden. So he made what they call a Satchagiriya, which means, if this is true, may this happen. So he said, if it's true that I've accumulated virtue, may I be fat with a big pot belly with long ears and an ugly face. And then poof, poof, it happened. And from that point on, people would leave him alone and he could get on with his practice. And so he was very happy. When you see Prasangachai, you'll see it's the same as the fat laughing Buddha of Maitreya Buddha that you find in China. Now you may doubt whether this is actually true, whether this could actually happen, but I can tell you such miraculous things do occur, because I've myself, when I was younger, I had a big pot belly, I had very long ears, I had an ugly face. I said, if I have virtue, may I become beautiful like the Buddha, and then poof. Why are you laughing? So, we have this feeling that the teacher attains to something and then the Dharma goes into decline after it. What I have seen that happened is this is true, but there's always somebody that comes along that kind of lifts everything up again. So in Thailand, for example, you had kind of various states of decline, and then Luang Por Man came along in the forest tradition and boosted it up. Then Ajahn Chah came and boosted it up. Luang Por Sot, who's the teacher in our system, he came along and boosted it up. So you do have this decline, but you also have these moments of people that kind of lift things up again and inspire. The Buddha described it this way. He said, imagine a drum. Now, drum is always the symbol for the Dharma. Because the Dharma, the sound of the Dharma, the reputation, the resonance of the Dharma spreads far and wide. And the only thing that you can compare that to in an old Indian civilization is the sound of the drum. The drum is a message that goes right across the valley and across the mountainside in a way that no other communication can. So Dharma was always compared to being like a drum. And he said, this drum is beaten, but what happens is where you stretch the skin over the drum, you knock in pegs to hold the skin tight over the drum, over the hollow part. But what happens is the skin will crack and the drum will start to lose its resonance. So what you do is you hammer in another peg where it's cracked to tighten it up again. And you'll keep hammering in pegs, but eventually there won't be enough room left for any more pegs. And eventually the skin of the drum will start to crack and the sound of the drum will diminish and deteriorate. He said in the same way, this is what happens when a teaching is given. It will start to diminish and deteriorate. So what we are left with then is stories. If the original attainment has gone, we are left with the stories of what was that wisdom in the first place. And those people that reinvigorate Dharma or religion are the tool that they have are the stories. Those are the ways they can contextualize, understand things, and change. And this is true of all traditions. We all have the story. So the story goes that within the ignorance that comes after the original teaching has declined, within that field of ignorance will be sent a messenger. And this, again, we have in all traditions. So in Christianity, you have this idea that God created the world. Now you're all living in sin, so he sends a messenger into the world to tell you that that's not your home place and that you should be getting back to heaven. In Buddhism, we have the exact same motif in the Lotus Sutra. There, the Buddha is presented as like an overarching, more like a god, or a being that oversees and overlooks humanity. But every so often, he will send like a manifestation of himself into the world to teach people Dharma. So the Lotus Sutra also has this exact same story motif. I think we should update the story a little bit. And I did hear a version of this, which I found quite amusing. And that's of a kid playing a computer game. And what happens is, in the computer game, you have a character, and that character has to go around and blow apart other characters, right? And this is what children these days consider fun. When I was young, we rode bicycles, but this is what they consider to be fun. So they are a character in a story in the computer. Now imagine a child who got so lost or caught up in the computer game they were playing that they had completely forgotten about themselves. They were so closely identified with the story in the computer. How would you shake them out of it? Well, one way you might do it is, if you're a good programmer, I guess, is you program into the story, you place a little character into the story that says to the kid, hey, listen, try to break from the attachment to everything that's going on here, right? And if the child can do that, suddenly they'll remember who they are. They're not that persona in the story. So I like this analogy. This is a, I think, updated version of the story. That this is what's happening to us. We are caught up in this process of engagement with experience. And the message that is coming into us is try to break your attachment to experience. What your real nature is isn't told. I mean, the Buddha very rarely tried to describe what enlightenment is. His view was, I will tell you what you need to do to get to it. I'm not going to tell you stories, hey guys, it's really cool, but not tell you how to get to it. So this is the story. This is certainly in the Lotus Sutra, the Buddha manifests in the world to teach beings to break themselves from attachment, turn the attention around, and what will happen is they will remember their actual own true, real nature. So this is the stories that come to us, and this is what we're left with when the original teacher and teacher's disciples are no longer able to give that self-same experience to the disciples. Because if a teaching is going to work, you don't want to worship the teacher, right? You don't want to worship the teaching. If you're given the key to your prison cell, you don't want to hang the key to your prison cell on the wall and start to worship it. Oh, wonderful key, you are the thing that is the tool of my liberation. But not actually take that key and turn it in the lock and leave the cell. So the story is what we're left with. So we know that there is this other nature. There is this thing at the end of our practice. There is a scope that is bigger than just being a human, animal, DNA machine, paying your tax, feeding the cat, looking after your children, and getting old, sick, and dying. There is a scope that is larger than that, and it belongs to each and every person. So this story that we're left with, I'm thinking of Michael Faraday, and he was one of the great scientists, and he was practicing with impure pieces of copper, and stroking natural magnets along the copper. And by doing this, if he made a very refined compass, he could actually affect a compass needle and make it twitch by doing this, right? What he's doing is he's experimenting with electricity. And so he's very famous in the world of science. You may know of a Faraday motor. It's the thing that you will experience it as is your electricity meter. That's actually a Faraday motor. The electricity goes through the wire, spins this disc, and that disc then will say how much electricity you've used. So Faraday was experimenting with these, but he could only get a very, very slight reaction because his tools and his understanding weren't good enough. And Queen Victoria went to visit him, and she looked at his experiments, and she said, "Yes, but what can you do with it?" Like electricity, you can see what we've done with it, right? Faraday's answer was very good, I thought. He said to Queen Victoria, "What can you do with a baby?" So this idea of an embryonic thing, that something may appear very small, very weak, very feeble, but in the future is going to change everything. So this is where we come to the story of Samson and Delilah. And one of my favorite stories, mainly because I'd seen it and I'd heard it, and it just was just nonsense. And then when I finally read a really good account, actually by a Spanish mystic, of the meaning of the story, I'm like, oh, that's right, it makes perfect sense now. And this is one of the first stories that I really understood, and it set me off on a path of trying to interpret stories. So in this story, Samson, early on in his career, in fact, when he's born, there was a fanfare of angels made this beautiful fanfare of music on the day that he was born. So it's probably a bit frightening for his parents, but it shows that he was destined to be somebody who was special. And because of this, his parents were told very clearly that he must obey 3 rules. He must never touch alcohol or drugs. He must never touch a dead body. And he must never cut his hair. So Samson grows up, and he does indeed follow these 3 rules. And he becomes a person of immense strength. Earlier on in his career, I think it was his first wife or maybe his second wife, he goes to get married. And on his way to the marriage ceremony, he comes across a lion, and the lion attacks him. And with his bare hands, he rips the lion to pieces and kills it. He goes and gets married. On his way back, sometime later, he sees the carcass of the lion that he'd killed. And in the carcass is a bee's nest. And out of the bee's nest, he scoops honey, and he gives it out to some of his friends. So the family of his wife don't like him very much, and they want to extract from him a toll. They want to make him pay them. And so he gives them a riddle. He says, if you can answer the riddle, I will pay you. It's actually reams of cloth. I don't know the significance of that. I will pay you if you can answer the riddle. And the riddle is this. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the fierce, something sweet. So his wife cajoles him. He says, what's the meaning of the story? You can tell me. I'm your wife. Just whisper it in my ear. And he says, well, out of the eater, the lion is the eater. And after I killed the lion, out of the lion came the honey, something to eat. So out of the fierce lion, came something sweet, the honey. She says, oh, right. And she goes and tells her family, and they come and they answer the riddle, and he has to pay the debt. His next wife is his third wife, which is Delilah. I'm not sure what happened to the second one, but the third wife was Delilah. And at this point, Samson is, after having killed the lion, he's realized he's one of absolute immense strength. In fact, at one point, he's attacked by 1,000 Philistines, and he picks up as his only weapon the jawbone of a donkey, and he slaughters all these 1,000 Philistines. You notice the Old Testament is very bloody, right? It should appeal to the modern young generation with their computer games, I think. So he is of this immense strength, and he gets married to Delilah, but her relatives, they also don't like him, and they want to capture him and bind him. So she says to him, "What's the secret of your strength? Come on, you can tell me." Now, you'd think he would have learned by now, right? But, isn't it the way all the big tough guys are always a bit simple? And so she says, "Come on, you can tell me the secret of your great strength." He says, "Well, the only way that I can be bound is if you get wet bowstrings and tie me with them." So that night, she goes to her relatives. She says, "Get some wet bowstrings and tie him up." Now, wet bowstrings, because as the strings dry, they will contract. So they will tighten as they get dry. In the morning, he wakes up, he finds himself tied up. Ping, he breaks the bonds. And Delilah says to him, "You were lying. You didn't tell me the truth." And he says, "Yeah, well, I may be embellishing the story a bit, kind of making it a bit more sarcastic, but that's because I'm English." He says to her, "Yeah, well, I may have been lying." She says, "Come on, what's the secret?" And he says, "Well, the only way to bind me is if you use new rope." "Oh, okay, dear." He goes to sleep that night. She calls her relatives in. They tie him up with new rope. And in the morning, ping, he breaks the new rope. She says, "Now, you weren't telling me the truth." He doesn't seem to say, "You tied me up and tried to have me shipped off and slaughtered." That doesn't occur to him. So she says, "Come on, what's the real secret?" And he says, "Well, you have to tie my hair up in a bun, and then I won't have any strength." Again, that night, they tie his hair up, and again in the morning, he shakes his head, his hair comes down, and he still has all of his strength. Now Delilah pulls out the ultimate weapon in her arsenal, and she starts crying. And she cries for 7 solid days without stopping. Now, not even the strongest man in the world is able to endure 7 days of his wife crying. And eventually he tells her, "Well, the only way that the source of my strength is my hair. If you cut my hair, I lose my strength." So what do you think happened? Duh. That night, her relatives come and they shave him. And in the morning, he wakes up and he has no strength. So the Philistines, they jump on him. They do 3 things. They bind him. They tie him up. They pluck out his eyes to make him blind. And they take him to work on the corn mill. So he has to walk like a horse would drive the corn mill. He has to be put to work driving the corn mill. This goes on for many, many years. And people still remember this great figure of Samson and slaughtering 1,000 Philistines with only the jawbone of a donkey. They still remember it. And eventually, one day, the people are all out at the temple. And they gather on the roof. Hundreds or maybe thousands of them gather on the roof of the temple. And for entertainment, they want Samson brought out to entertain themselves with this once mighty, now feeble figure. And as Samson comes out, he's blind, but he can feel the walls. And he feels the walls and he feels the pillars when he gets to the pillars of the temple. And he calls on God and says, "One last time, give me back my strength." And he pushes the pillars apart. And the entire temple comes down, and all those people, including Samson, but all those people on the roof that were there for their entertainment, they all die. And that's the end of the story. It's a happy book, this Old Testament stuff, isn't it? Now, the meaning of the story is actually very, very precise. As I say, these stories predate Christianity, they predate Buddhism. The Buddha himself used many stories too in his teaching. Stories are a powerful way to internalize a truth. So, fairly quickly, we'll go through it. The three things that Samson can't do. He can't take alcohol, which means he has to stay away from delusion. He has to stay away from deluded people and be careful to keep himself pure of mind. He can't touch a dead body. And I see this as the same motif as the Buddha. When the Buddha was in the palaces, remember, before he left the palace to practice the renunciate life, he'd never seen an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and he'd never seen a samana, a monk. So I think this is the same motif, that Samson is not allowed to touch a dead body. It means he has not understood yet the scope that he's going to die. Like all of us, we get caught up in life. Only much later, only at some point does it suddenly occur to us, actually there's a much bigger scope to our picture and our story, and that is you're a mortal human being. And really the only important story in our life is what is life and what is death. The third part of that he's given is he's not to cut his hair. I never fully understood this, but hair always represents innocence. So leaving the hair long means you're innocent, and cutting the hair means you are no longer innocent. I'm not 100% sure why this is, but it is a very common idea, and you may have seen this in an internet viral story. It's actually not true, but people pass it around, about the Vietnam War, and the American army took some Red Indians to go along as trackers and work as trackers, and these Red Indians could listen to the earth, they could track things and have all kinds of powers. And then when they got the Indians to Vietnam, what do? They shaved the Indians' heads to make them like a GI, and then the Indians weren't able to do their thing. Now, it's actually not true. If you really look it up carefully, this true is just a fake story. But what's interesting is how many people believe this story and how often this story gets shared. So there is something about shaving the head that has something to do with the spiritual life. In India at the time, you had two kinds of recluses. One kind would never cut their hair, and the other kind would shave their head. So what is it about the religious life and, haircuts? I never really understood the connection, but it's very prevalent through all civilizations. We have this relationship. So, the lion is fierce. Now remember, Samson has great strength, but Samson is also very holy. So the idea of him slaying the lion and getting the honey means you can transform what is great strength into something that's very spiritual. Bees always represent spirituality. Whenever you see bees, this is the ultimate. And bees are spiritual aspirations, because bees have two qualities. One, if you're good and you handle them right, they give you honey. If you handle them wrong, you get a sting. So this is our spiritual thoughts and our spiritual conscience. If you take on a spiritual practice, you'll get the honey from that practice because you've improved, you've changed, you've grown. But you also get a sting because there's lots of things that you still want to do that now your conscience won't let you do. So bees are always are the holiest of all the animals. So for Samson, of course, he has no problem with the stings. He just sticks his hand in and scoops out the honey because he's a pure person. So that's the meaning of the story with the lion. Now, after his head is shaved, Samson, I always want to say Samsung. It just... keeps coming out. Samson. Samson, after his head is shaved, of course, Delilah represents desire, right? So as you get caught up by desire, so desire will undercut your strength, will remove your strength from you. And desire, when you are full victim to desire, it has three qualities. First of all, it will make you blind. By being in desire, you are caught in ignorance and you are blind. You become prejudiced, you become blind, you become unable to really see and understand the world around you because too much of what you see is based upon what you want. So that's why his eyes are put out. Desire will bind you. So you are no longer free if you are caught up in desire because the desire will be controlling you. The third quality, desire will put you to work because if you want things, you're going to have to work for them. If you're in desire, you're going to have to pay a price to get the things that you desire. Now it's interesting, the Buddha described this, and he said that living the life free from desire was living the life of a monk. But living the life as a householder is a life that he called crowded and dusty. Crowded and dusty. So to the renunciate, the being free from desire, this is freedom, this is happiness. Desires will bind you, blind you, and put you to work. Now finally, we have this beautiful metaphor. Samson is there under the temple with all the people looking for entertainment on the roof. The people on the roof represent your thoughts on the top of your mind. And what are your thoughts? They're here, they're there, they're chit-chatting, they're moving around, they're buzzing, they're uncontrolled, and they're always looking for some kind of entertainment. So the temple is representing you, and on the top, on the surface of your being, is this buzzing, manic thoughts, right? But underneath the temple, there is a root, and if you can just apply pressure at the root at the right place, this entire system will collapse. So, where do we apply the pressure? The Buddha also used this analogy. He said you have to cut at the tree root if you want to bring down the tree. If you try to cut the branches or anything else, it's just going to keep growing up. You have to cut at the tree root and make it dead like a tree stump, is what he said. A later adaptation of this was a Zen teaching. And Zen described the mind in this way. Described the mind as being like creepers. And this is what creepers do, and you can see this in the canals in Thailand. Creepers will grow over different objects. They will grow over a tree, over a house, over a boat. And they will completely choke off the original thing. And very often the house or the boat has decomposed and even disappeared. But it leaves the creepers up, kind of slung there in the air. But creepers have no substance of their own. If you cut the creeper just at that one point on the root, the entire structure comes tumbling down. So this was the Zen story. It was actually Huang Po, one of the great Zen masters. And he used this analogy for the mind. He said, you've created this mind, your thoughts, your views, and your concepts have enveloped the world over what were originally real things, true things. But those things have long since changed or disappeared, but you still have this set of views and constructs and ideas, that created world that you carry around with you. He said, just one small cut and this entire thing will come down. So the place that we are cutting at in the story is at this point of experiencing. Every time the mind starts to get drawn into experiencing, we cut or we interrupt. I like interrupt. It's a little less vicious than cutting, right? You interrupt and you bring your attention back. Not allowing the mind to continually be leaking out and caught up in the entertainments, the experiences, and different things. The conscious engagement with the world. And you're continually returning the attention to yourself. This is the only root of this entire problem, according to Buddhism. So this is the place where we start applying the energy, we start applying the effort to undermine this entire process itself. And this is very important because any other teaching, all the other stories that we have in the world, they are stories of how you can change your experience. Change one experience for another experience. You can change from being a student to a university, and then university to free, and then free to married, which is not free. And then you can change one experience for another experience. But at what point does your scope change? That you can undermine this entire process of experiencing and go back to something more original, more beautiful, more pure. So just like the kid on the computer game, when he's broken from his attachment to the computer game, he realizes it was delusion and he realizes what he really is. In the same way, if we do this practice, we will come back to our original nature. And all of these great gurus and teachers and stories are telling us that this original nature, this thing, really is there, and it really is your essence, and it really is the only thing that we should be paying attention to. So I want to finish off with a short story, and this is, I love stories. This is of a woman in India, and she's given a pot of wheat germ or wheat grain, and she carries this pot on her head. But the handle of the pot had broken off where she'd not been handling it properly, and as she's walking along, the grain is leaking out of the pot behind her. And what her experience is her weight, her burden, gets lighter and lighter and lighter. But when she gets home, she gets to her destination and she takes the pot off her head. This wheat grain was supposed to be planted and support her family and the household. And what she found was her pot was empty. So these seeds that are carried in the pot that are given to you, this means you've been born in a human condition. You've been given the opportunity to do practice. You've been given the opportunity to look to the future, to get past these questions of life and death itself. And what do? We let these seeds drop behind us. We don't pay attention. Letting our karmic opportunity slip. And then the experience is, I just want to enjoy life for a bit and have some nice things. Yes, your burden gets lighter and lighter and lighter. But then when you get to the end, when you are faced with the questions of life and death, what you find is you hadn't prepared. You hadn't gained any of the necessary insights and practice. So this story is one of to remind us that we have a great karmic fortune for whatever reason. Luck, God, karma, good parenting, who knows what it is. But you are in this circumstance, you're in this condition where you can start to investigate these questions. You can start to expand your scope beyond just the scope of the regular human condition. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and there's plenty of time if you have any questions. I hope you enjoyed the story of Samson and Delilah and can see that these stories have a real message and a real meaning.
Yeah. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. I'll now open the floor to questions and answers. Anybody has questions that I can pass the microphone to? To Bhante? Oh, yeah.
Bhante, I understand the story, talking about experiences, we are so used to being exposed to experiences. I just don't understand. There are people, there's such a belief that says that the reason why we are not getting to the root and not getting enlightened is because we haven't suffered enough. So I think that's a kind of yes. But at the same time, like what you were talking about, the last part of your story about we try to be good to ourselves, we try to be a bit gentle on ourselves, so we try to have an easier life. But at the end of the day, we realize that we are actually very superficial. We just couldn't get to the root of it. Yeah, so I don't know, is this contradicting or does this make sense to you? Yeah, thank you.
That's exactly right. The idea that we are not practicing because we haven't suffered enough, I think that would appeal to English people. That we like our suffering. But the point is that for all animals, they don't have an awareness of their own death, their own mortality. And so we've been through, according to the legend, according to the story, we've been through millions and millions of reincarnations as animals. Only at this point are we able to start to become aware that we're going to die. Only at this point of humanity does our scope increase. There is a common story that human beings have the best opportunity to do practice because our suffering and our happiness is fairly balanced. And if you don't have enough suffering, you won't practice. If you have too much pleasure, you won't practice. And that you're better off being a human being than a deva. Actually, this is not supported by any of the Buddhist texts. In all the Buddhist texts, when the Buddha taught devas, they all got enlightened because their capacity for understanding is far superior to ours. And I can see this. Our capacity for understanding is far superior to a dog's. Dogs are pretty smart, but they don't know about economics and fiscal policy and nuclear weapons. They just don't have the scope to do so. So comparing us to the devas, that's the same again. The devas have an increased scope. And when the Buddha taught Abhidhamma, you may remember the story, he went up to the heavenly realm and he taught his mother Abhidhamma. Why? Because human beings were not smart enough to be able to understand Abhidhamma. So goes the story. And then Sariputta said, no, you have to let us have it too. And he said, all right. And he told it to Sariputta, and now we study Abhidhamma, but I'm not sure we're smart enough to fully understand it. So devas, the idea, now devas don't have suffering, at least the couple of realms above the human realm still have suffering, but as you go up, they don't have suffering. But they do have an increased capacity for Dharma. And if you are a non-returner, you will actually get born in a very high heavenly realm. And from there you can practice. So it's okay to make an aspiration to be reborn in a heavenly condition, but you must make that aspiration to be born around Dharma. Yeah? Yeah.
Anybody else has a question? All right.
Bhante, it's not so much of a question, but perhaps maybe you can just give your viewpoint on how I view things and my experiences. Listening to your talk where you mentioned about, you were mentioning about dependent origination, and listening to the talk, because dependent origination also affects on our own conditioning, where we are conditioned by our past experiences, how we react to things and how we think is due to our conditioning. And in order not to react to things or to circumstances around us, the ability to then focus on something neutral, for example, our breath, which is the reason why the technique of cutting the root of our thoughts, of our actions, for example, if we are spinning stories, the ability and the mindfulness and the awareness to realize that we're actually spinning stories and creating situations and images in our mind and believing in them. The ability to cut that and bring our mind back to our breath is actually crucial in terms of how to stop the cycle of action and reaction. And that is actually to just maintain our calm and peacefulness within ourselves. That's one. Secondly is the ability to bring our practice to the next level. Because that first part, which I just referred to, is just maintaining our peace and our ability to not react. The second part is how then to bring our own practice to the next level. And that requires actually formal sitting. So I just like your input, please.
Yeah, I think you put it all very nicely. Yeah. The only one thing that occurs to me is that peace is something we need to do. We need to calm things down. But ultimately, we have to that peace also is an experience. So we have to undercut that too. But this is all part of the practice. And yeah, no, I think you put everything very nicely.
All right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
Did you ever hear an Old Testament story at a Dharma talk before? I think you've heard all of the other stories, so I thought I'd introduce you to something that you don't know. Right?
Yes, Bante, I want to ask you about the story. It's like in the story of the Buddha, there's some people say that Buddha born, they step like 7 steps, and there's a flower, whatever, lotus, come out. I just wondering, is this in the text or? And can you just comment on that? Because I was thinking the Buddha sometimes saying that he's just a normal human being, but there's a picture that's showing like it's a supramundane thing.
Yeah, we get a lot of conflicting stories about the Buddha. First thing to remember is a story does not have to be literally true. It is containing a truth in the story. So nobody really thinks that Samson can push his hands on stone pillars and bring down an enormous temple. So a story doesn't have to actually be true in order to contain a truth. And the Buddha himself used stories many times. But every time the Buddha used a story, he would always explain the story, which I find very refreshing and useful. Whereas in all other stories, you have to really work hard to find the explanation. There is a deification process that goes on. So the Buddha we have some stories of him, accounts of him as very much a human figure. But even in the Theravada, this human figure starts to get deified, starts to get turned into a god. And we hear about him throwing his hair up into the sky and Indra coming down and catching the hair. We hear about him floating his alms bowl upstream. We hear all of these kind of miraculous stories. And what's happening is a process of deification. So in the Theravada suttas, very often the sutta will begin with, "Thus have I heard, the Buddha was at the squirrel's grove and this is what he said." Then you go to early Mahayana sutras. The Buddha was there in the squirrel's grove and 200,000 people came and bowed to him and said, "Please, O great and worthy one, deliver us a sermon." And then mid-Mahayana sermons say, the Buddha sat at the squirrel's grove and the earth shook, the lightning flared, the manifold worlds across countless eons and galaxies all shook and everybody went silent. And then you get into the Vajrayana suttas, where it's like a ray of light shone from his head, and that's split into 60 billion rays, and every one of those billion rays enlightened countless billions of people on billions of worlds. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And these are just the introduction to the sutra, you know. So we can expect some hyperbole. We can expect some kind of, within the sutras, even in the Theravada sutras, we can expect this process of deification to start to arise. So did the Buddha really, was he really born landing on his feet? Did he really take 7 steps with lotus flowers blossoming up? Did he really survey the world and say, this is my final lifetime? Well, I wasn't there, so who knows? What was interesting, the Buddha was supposedly 3 times the size of a normal human being. And again, I think this is part of the deification. Well, the Buddha must be more handsome and bigger. And when the British archaeologists discovered what they believed to be Kapilavatthu, where the Buddha lived, and they discovered the gate through which the Buddha had left in order to go on the renunciate life. And as soon as they'd done this, the Sri Lankan monks went with tape measures to measure the size of the gate to see if a person that's 3 times the size of a human being could actually fit through the doorway. And what they found was they couldn't. The doorway was too narrow. So they said, in that case, the Buddha must have been 1 1/3 the size of a regular human being. So we do have this deification process. But this adds to the story, and the story is part of the tradition. So, for example, the story of having 3 palaces, one for the wet season, one for the dry season, and one for the cold season. This was a Buddhist story, but it was also, we find many times in Iran, there are many Iranian stories, that pre-Islamic stories, that also have that same motif. The Buddha met a young man called Yasa, and he also had 3 palaces. So it seems to be, we don't have to take these things literally. The story of 3 palaces means I enjoyed luxury. But now I know that being a monk is better, the enlightenment is better. So some people like to try and separate, well, what was the original Buddha, what was the later stories, but the stories are part of the context. So that's a very loud crack, is it? I thought you'd actually broken something. Yeah. So for me, I'm happy with the stories. I'm happy with beams of light going off and spreading across countless billions of galaxies, and in every galaxy there's billions of people, and they all got perfectly enlightened when, it's a nice idea, right? It just means something important is about to be said. Yes.
Sister, may I just pass the mic to you first?
With your interest in psychology, I'm just wondering if you've had the opportunity of reading this book by this evolutionary psychologist, Robert Wright, whose book is entitled Why Buddhism is True.
Right, is true, yes.
Yes, have you read that?
I haven't read that. This is a book that's doing the rounds at the moment. It's got onto the New York bestsellers list. I'm very, very anti-evolutionary psychology. I'm a very anti-evolutionary theory in total. And the reason is it is self-fulfilling. So you say, well, the giraffes have long necks because they reach the leaves on the top of the tree. And it's a self-fulfilling story. And like, well, why don't deer have long necks? Why don't elephants have long necks? I mean, and they say, well, the deer didn't develop a long neck. You're like, it's just a self-fulfilling story. So evolutionary psychology does this too. And what they say is every quality that we can find in a human being, well, it had this advantage and that's why I'm not convinced myself. But I understand the book is not actually about evolutionary psychology.
No, it's
Right.
not. But because there are so many claims that Buddhism is based on science, so to speak, and having covered the book, I found that he gave a scientific, so-called scientific explanation to some of the doctrines. Yeah.
So would you recommend it to everyone here?
Which is precisely why I'm asking whether you've read the book to see if his experiences, his personal experiences, are something that gives us a sneak peek into the experience of...
Okay, so I don't know. I haven't read the book, so...
Okay, thank you.
It is doing the rounds right now, and so might be one to look out for. Yeah.
Okay, Bante, if I can just add on one information. Brothers and sisters, if you would like to know about the appreciations analysis of the Buddha's life, we actually have a free book distributions for Between the Lines, authored by Sister Sylvia Bay, still available at the office counter. You are most welcome to take a few copies from the office counter if you like to know more about the Buddha's life and the way how it is analytically appreciated. All right. Any more questions for Bante? One more. Okay.
Bante, can you enlighten me on the dependent origination, the function of dependent origination? One of them is like you want to manage the desire, so you had a contact and feeling. So rather than manage in the feeling, you manage in the contact. Is that correct? You cut off in the contact.
It depends on which form. There's so many forms of dependent origination, and some of them had 3 links, some of them had 8 links, some had 9 links, some had 11, some had 24. Many of them switch the links, so especially Nama, Rupa and consciousness get switched. I mean, don't laugh, but my MA thesis, which is now in its 11th year, is on dependent origination. So I have listed out, I don't know, maybe 80 different versions of dependent origination. So one thing that we can be sure of, it was very fluid. And being very fluid in each situation, it was really trying to just outline this process whereby attention lands on something and then the experience fountains up out of it until we get caught in bhava. Bhava is conscious engagement with things. And as a meditator, you can experience this because your mind gets in conscious engagement and then suddenly you remember yourself. Oh, I'm supposed to be meditating. That moment right there, that's the sati sampajanya, that's the mindfulness. So the more times you catch your mind descending into conscious engagement with thoughts, feelings, etc., the more times you're interrupting that process and coming back. And it's a very simple and a very humble practice. But just like the baby, just like Michael Faraday discovering electricity, it didn't seem like very much to Queen Victoria, but you can see where this seed leads to. So it's the same with our own practice. You may not feel like you're getting very far, but you just planted a seed that will change everything. Faraday's work was taken up by Maxwell. Maxwell applied the mathematics to it, and then he unified the forces of electricity and magnetism, but he couldn't figure out light. And then a scientist later on figured out that if you bathe certain materials in light, the materials will emit an electron. And he won a Nobel Prize for this. And when he won the Nobel Prize for it, they said, for this work of how certain materials emit an electron when bathed with light, plus other works, because this scientist had done other works, but they were so stupid and so embarrassing that the Nobel Prize Committee didn't want them mentioned. And this, of course, was Albert Einstein. And his other works was special relativity and general relativity. So Einstein got the Nobel Award, but they would not mention his work on relativity. So it shows that these germs will blossom in ways that you cannot predict. And usually when you practice, you think, my mind's a mess and I get from here and I only get like half a step. You've got no idea where this practice is going to take you. Or just far out of your scope, it's going to take you into a completely new realm. Yeah. Okay, one last comment or question, and then it's my lunchtime. That's why they invite monks to speak before lunch. It makes sure we don't talk for too long.
Okay, we have one last question here.
Pandit, can I ask, because just now you mentioned that enlightenment is our nature, is a given right. So can I say that regardless whether we do good things or bad things, eventually we'll reach enlightenment? Meaning it's either how slow or how fast we are. So should we, I don't know whether we should put it like in a positive view that we are going to be enlightened somehow, sometime. Right. Or we're going to exist permanently.
Enlightenment is, but it only becomes real when you get out of the way. So our processive one is dismantling this whole constructed self that we carry around. We might say ego, but if you were there yesterday, you'll know that ego has a different meaning. So this is always a dichotomy. This is always a difficulty with all religious traditions. Of saying, on the one hand, you don't have to do anything because it's already there, it's already your nature. It's not actually your nature. You are in it, not it is in you. So, but then what do? You had the same question in the Old Testament, in the Bible, right? Was God's love goes to all people. Well, then what happens is some people go to heaven and some people to hell. And they have this really difficult question. Well, what do I have to do? Do I have to do things to get to heaven? Or does God just love me and I don't know? So this same question always appears. And we have it in Buddhism too. This enlightenment nature is your nature, but everything that you are is good or evil, right or wrong. It has this duality nature. So, yes, you're going to get there anyway, regardless of whether you do good or bad. But the point is that some things will take you closer to it, and some things will take you farther away from it. So in the Deveda Vittaka Sutta, some of you may know, this is the sutta on two kinds of thought. The Buddha analyzed his own thought and he said, and this is the definition of right intention and wrong intention. The Buddha analyzed his thoughts and it occurred to him that some kinds of thought are harmful to himself, harmful to others, or harmful to himself and others. And other kinds of thought are not harmful to himself, not harmful to others, and not harmful to both himself and others. So he asked himself the question, well, what kinds of thoughts lie on which side? And he said, well, thoughts of greed, we want to start with the negative, don't we? So, Gama Vittaka, so thinking of desire. What's the next one? Payabhata. So thoughts of ill will and thoughts of cruelty. These are things that block wisdom, he said. These will block wisdom. And he said on the other side, we have right intention, which is the opposite of these three. So the opposite of thoughts of greed are thoughts of renunciation or relinquishment. The opposite of thoughts of ill will are non-ill will. And the opposite of the thoughts of cruelty is non-cruelty. And by the way, this word non-cruelty is the word that Gandhi used, and it's ahimsa. In the Pali, it's avihingsa, but in the Sanskrit, it's ahimsa, which means non-violence or non-cruelty. So he recognized that there are certain things that you do that are going to foster and encourage wisdom, and there are certain things that you do that are going to block wisdom. The interesting thing in the sutta is, however, towards the end of the sutra, he said, the kind of thinking that blocks wisdom is clearly something that is not of benefit to me or others or both. But the kind of thinking that fosters wisdom, even if I was to think of it day and night, there would be no blame in that for me. But it would make my body tired, and when my body is tired, my mind won't concentrate. So you have to give up both kinds of thinking, the right kind and the wrong kind. So in here we have one of the resolutions of this question, is that there's a time when you need to push out what is not good and add in what is good, and there is a time when you need to withdraw from the entire process itself.
All right. Okay, Bhante.
Okay, so we're done for today. Thank you for having me in Singapore and setting up a very rigorous schedule for me over 10 days. But it's always nice. It's always nice to do that. We've talked about some difficult concepts and ideas, and I like to focus on enlightenment myself because I think this sets the context of the direction in which we are headed. But of course, it's the most difficult of the concepts to really internalize and make use of. There was a sutta that called the Meghiya or Mekhiya Sutta, and Meghiya was the disciple, was the attendant of the Buddha. And Meghiya had been with the Buddha, and they'd seen a grove, and he wanted to go and practice in this grove. And the Buddha said to him, "Not now, Meghiya, this is not the time for you to go and practice your meditation in this grove." And Meghiya says, "Yeah, but I really want to go to this grove right now and do my meditation." And the Buddha said, "Not now, Meghiya, this is not the time for you to go and do your meditation in this grove." And Meghiya says, "Well, thanks for that, but yeah, I really want to go and do my meditation in this grove." And the Buddha says to him, "Go, what can I say to you?" So Meghiya goes to the grove and sits down to do his meditation, and he can't concentrate his mind. He's getting absolutely nowhere. So he comes back to the Buddha and he says, "I'm getting absolutely nowhere in my meditation." And the Buddha says, "I told you this is not the time to go to the grove and do your meditation." So what did he tell Meghiya to do? He gave Meghiya 5 suggestions for what he should do in order to correct his practice. First of all, hang out with good friends. Associate with the wise people. Secondly, be one of refined behavior and associate with people who have refined behavior. Thirdly, go to the talks. Make sure that you're one who talks on things that have benefit. Talks of contentment, talks of renunciation, talks of loving kindness, talks of persistence in effort, these kind of things. Right? Fourthly, he said, practice the 4 right efforts. Wholesome states you need to arouse and maintain. Unwholesome states of mind that have arisen, you need to try and abandon them. And then fifthly, he said, and perhaps the most important, pay attention to rising and ceasing. Pay attention to arising and ceasing. So what I find interesting in this sutta is even the Buddha, he's not giving these really deep philosophical statements. He's planting that story. He's planting that seed. And that's what you have here. You have good friends. You have good companions. You have good Dharma talks. You have people of refined behavior. You're all engaged in this effort of trying to improve the things that you can improve. And we're paying attention to arising and ceasing. So right now I'm going to cease from my Singapore tour and take my lunch. So thank you all for having me here. I'm going to just give the blessing before we go. Sabbitiyo vivajantu sabbarogo vinasatu mate bhavatwantarayo sukhidikayuko bhava abhiva Tanasi lisani changwutha pachayino chataro dhamma vadanti ayuvano sukhang balang.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bante, for giving us a very inspiring Dhamma talk and Q&A as well as the sharing of merits.